Good morning and welcome to the Point. It has been a very active week politically. The United States Attorney General William Barr was in Grand Rapids. He spoke at the Ford Museum, and later we talked to him about his message about China and also talked to him about the resumption of the death penalty. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for doing this and listening to your comments about China just a few moments ago. It seems that the administration wide is very concerned about Chinese intellectual property theft, espionage, a number of different things that they're doing industrially. Talk to me about that effort and what you want to do to combat it.
Right. Well, the Chinese communists have been on a campaign of stealing American intellectual property. 80% of industrial espionage in the United States is done for the benefit of China. We're seeing an increase in these cases. They've been going up for a long time in all the critical technologies. This is part of the Chinese plan to become the number one technological power in the world, but they're doing it by stealing our technology. When they steal our technology and know-how, they're stealing the future of the American people. They're stealing the future of our children and grandchildren, because it's been our technological prowess that's created all the prosperity we have and the opportunity we have for future generations.
You were talking to business leaders, some academics, there was law enforcement. Who is going to be principally responsible for trying to stop that activity, knowing that the Chinese will not stop on their own?
Well, the primary responsibility and the people who can be most effective are the American companies and academic institutions themselves. They're the ones right there who can help us identify who the bad actors are, and also the first line of defense to make sure that our technology doesn't fall into the hands of Chinese graduate students or others that are actually working with the Chinese Communist Party. In the government, it's primarily the Justice Department and the FBI that are responsible.
So what were you asking these business leaders to do? You were pretty specific about some things that you thought that they could do to avoid some of these pitfalls.
Right, well, I think two things. One is what we just talked about, which is to make sure that their businesses protect their intellectual property and know-how, and they're not compromising it with the Chinese. But the other thing we're seeing a lot of right now is the Chinese using American business people to spread their message within the United States. So if they have any leverage on a business, the companies doing business in China, they intimate that, hey, you can do us a favor by getting this message out to the American leaders. And what that does is it puts a friendly face on Chinese propaganda in the United States. And this is the kind of influence campaign they're running in the United States. They're using American business people to go to our government and try to get our government to do things that the Chinese government wants.
Part of the problem that exists in trying to contain this is the amount of trade that we do with China as well. I mean, this is a very big factor in our economy. And so there are people in business that are reluctant to alienate themselves from that kind of a market. I mean, that's just kind of an economy thing.
Well, the other part of my message here, and it's been borne out by the facts, is that whatever benefit they're gaining from China is short term. Basically, they're trading away the future of their companies, and they're putting their companies eventually in the grave against Chinese competitors by playing their game. They have a very short term horizon on this. The Chinese are playing a long-term game. So they go in, they have their business pilfered. The Chinese set up a strong competitor, subsidize the competitor, put restrictions on their business, and eventually overtake their business. One of the problems is a lot of our business leaders have too short-term an attention span. They just care about, next few quarters and getting their stock options cashed. Well, the Chinese are playing a long game, and we have to play a long game too.
Over the course of the last 10 or 20 years, I've heard our elected officials, Republicans and Democrats, complain about intellectual theft, intellectual property theft, about currency manipulation, about all of these things. But is there something government to government that you can do to encourage the Chinese to be more fair players, if you will?
Well, as I was saying today, we've been acting in good faith and have been liberalizing the regime to permit China a full role in the world economy. But the Chinese aren't playing by the world's rules. They're playing with these hard brass knuckle tactics, and we've obviously put all the pressure we can on the government level for them to stop it, but we've seen no sign of it abating.
When you bring this message out, I know the Secretary Pompeo is going to have a message in the next few days. Is this just to bring it to the attention of the American people and the American business population so they're more aware, or is there something else you'll be asking them to do?
Well, I think it's at this stage to bring it to their attention. I think the American people know what's going on. They've seen it, and we've lost a tremendous amount of our manufacturing base to China. And now we're becoming dependent on China, and they saw that in the COVID-19 problem, how we had to kowtow to the Chinese to get stuff even from American companies that the American people needed. We need to reindustrialize the United States and bring our production back to the United States.
And just one final note on this subject, specifically you talked about production when it comes to medicines, not just PPEs and all of those kind of things, but very critical medical supplies.
Pharmaceuticals, yeah. And medical devices. We have the intellectual property, which they're constantly trying to steal from us, and now they're the primary manufacturer of these pharmaceuticals. So this plague that we've had, COVID-19, shows how a country can really be subject to leverage if they're dependent on another country for the pharmaceuticals.
On another subject, for the first time in about 17 years, death penalty is being carried out in federal cases. How did that come about?
Yeah, there's a misconception out there that I just came into office and decided we're going to start up the death penalty. What happened was it was stopped by the courts, several years ago, many years ago, because of the method of execution, and there were a lot of different challenges. And so a few years ago, Attorney General Holder put a process in place to come up with a method and a protocol that would be acceptable to the courts. So when I came into office, that had just been completed, and we were now in a position to resume executions in the federal system.
This past week, I also talked to the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez. Among other things, we talked about campaigning in a pandemic.
Well, this is undeniably uncharted territories, but we've changed our tactics, but we haven't changed our goals. We've got our virtual clipboards out, Rick. Rather than knocking on doors, we've been talking to people by the millions via text message, phone calling, social media, and the like. And it's been very effective. We bought up over 140 million cell phone numbers over the course of my tenure as DNC chair, because we understood that you have to meet the voter where they consume their news. So we've been prepared for this. Over the course of the last 3 months, we've trained over 10,000 digital organizers, and we've put them to work right away. We had a primary in April in Wisconsin, and there was a very important state Supreme Court race there. And we won that race going away because we out-hustled the Republicans. We had been working virtually and digitally, contacting voters, showing them how to vote absentee. And because of that, we were successful. In Michigan, same thing. Lavora Barnes and I have a great relationship with your wonderful state party chair, Lavora, and also so many others in Michigan. And we've made investments. Every zip code counts. That's literally the name of our partnership with our state party partners. So I've done calls with rural organizers, rural Democratic leaders in Michigan. We've been very active in Grand Rapids and elsewhere. We're talking to everyone. And so again, our tactics have changed, but our goals haven't. And we have made very, very muscular investments in Michigan so that we can not only win for Joe Biden and Gary Peters, but we want to flip the House of Representatives in the state of Michigan. I think we can do it. We want to defend those critical congressional seats, and I think we can do it. We only need 4 seats in the State House of Representatives to flip that house. And we're bound and determined to do it because we're trying to elect Democrats up and down the ballot so that we can fight for health care, fight to enable Governor Whitmer to carry out her agenda of inclusion and opportunity.
He also weighed in on the presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden's new plan for clean jobs.
Right. Well, and it really underscores the importance of the partnerships we've been able to develop. We've got so many stakeholder groups in Michigan that we're working with, whether it's the local party, labor unions, faith leaders, business leaders, grassroots leaders, people across an ideological spectrum. Michigan wants a competent president who will put people first, not put simply a small group of rich people first. Joe Biden won every single county in Michigan in the Michigan primary. Michiganders know Joe Biden. They trust Joe Biden. They remember that Barack Obama and Joe Biden helped save the auto industry. When Donald Trump said, the auto industry, well, we could let them go bankrupt. That was what the Republicans were saying. And so people know, and we're in a manufacturing recession right now. It predated, as you know, Rick, it predated the coronavirus. And that's because this president has had a horrific trade policy with China. We've lost that trade war. He said this, Donald Trump said multiple times in 2016, there will never be a plant closure. He said it in Michigan. He said it elsewhere. That's not accurate because this president is simply in over his head. And so I am very excited about Joe Biden's commitment to building really millions of middle-class jobs, investing in clean energy, investing in modern infrastructure, investing in the auto industry so that we can command the global market in electric vehicles. We can command the global market in wind turbines, in solar panels, things where we're getting our clock cleaned right now by China. We've got to create good middle-class jobs. And that's exactly what Joe Biden's talking about. We're working hard to communicate that vision to voters. We're doing it differently. But I think it's sinking in. I'm optimistic in Michigan and elsewhere, but we're leaving nothing to chance.
And finally, we talked about what next month's convention in Milwaukee might look like.
We've been very clear from the outset at the Democratic National Committee that we're going to follow the science. We announced a while ago, first of all, that we were postponing the convention, and then subsequently that we were downsizing the footprint of the convention. Why? Because we listen to and we follow the science. Donald Trump abandoned North Carolina. We're not abandoning Milwaukee. Our convention will be anchored in Milwaukee. Joe Biden will accept the nomination in Milwaukee. It will be in front of a smaller audience. At the same time, I think we will continue our efforts, and I'm confident that we'll be able to put on a convention that is inspiring, that is exhilarating, that highlights our values as a party, that highlights the importance of presidential leadership with compassion and empathy and competence and a bold vision. Yes, it will be different, but I think it will be exceedingly exciting, and we've got a lot planned for that week in Milwaukee, and I'm really looking forward to it. But again, the bottom line is our convention's going to be safe. And you look at what's happening with Republicans. Jacksonville, many people in Jacksonville want nothing to do with a big rally. Look what happened in Tulsa a few weeks ago. That was an unmitigated disaster. Look what happened in South Dakota when the president went there. And Secret Service agents and others ended up testing positive. Joe Biden this is not an ego trip convention for Joe Biden. He doesn't need the ego gratification. Joe Biden understands that this is not about him. This is about how we turn around America. And that is, I think, one of the many fundamental differences between Joe Biden, who understands science and who understands humility and understands how to get things done, and Donald Trump, who's all about Donald Trump.
Earlier in the week, we invited all of the candidates running in the Republican primary for the 3rd Congressional District to come here to our studios for a debate. All but one accepted our invitation, and when we come back, a recap of that debate next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This past week here in our studios, we had 4 of the 5 candidates running for the Republican nomination for the 3rd Congressional District. We asked them to weigh in on a number of subjects. We started out by introducing them, of course, and here's how that went. Let's meet the candidates. Joe Farrington is a small business owner and a trustee for the Village of Lions. Representative Lynn Affendulis is the granddaughter of immigrants and lifelong West Michigander. Peter Meyer is an Iraq War veteran and the grandson of Fred Meyer. Tom Norton is an Afghanistan War veteran and founding board member of West Michigan Veterans focusing on suicide prevention. Our questions were taken verbatim in some cases or by suggestions from you, the listener. The first question goes to Mr. Farrington, decided by a random draw. We've received a number of questions about recent protests and demonstrations regarding racial injustice and the need for societal change. The Black Lives Matter movement has been seen nationwide, including in towns and cities that you seek to represent. What is your response to those protests, and how would you deal with the changes that are being demanded? Mr. Farrington?
Yes, Black Lives Matters. Well, let me tell you this. Voters, Americans, if you feel that the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement is simply a ploy to bring down, disrupt this country, and that the victims of these prolonged systemic injustices, if you believe that they're just seeking a paycheck, vote for these conservatives. I mean, if you feel that the color of your skin makes you a better person or superior to someone else, effectively a white supremacist, vote for these conservatives. If you choose to ignore the fact that President Trump was a 5-time draft dodger, a 6-time bankrupt businessman, a liar that was justly and lawfully impeached, vote for these conservatives.
Representative Affendulis.
In the 1960s, my father had a restaurant in downtown Grand Rapids. And in 1969, there were race riots in downtown Grand Rapids that effectively shut Grand Rapids down. And my father's business was effectively shut down, and it had been a very popular restaurant until then. We're not going to let that same thing happen again. It took decades to get downtown Grand Rapids back. We're not going to let that happen again. We are not going to let mobs of people decide the future of our community. We're not going to let them ruin the lives of business leaders and business people who have worked so hard to build their businesses and to employ so many people in Grand Rapids and in our communities. We're not going to let them rule. We are a nation of laws and order, and we are going to make sure that we maintain those laws and order so that our communities can thrive.
Mr. Meyer.
You know, I think we were all heartbroken by not only the death of George Floyd, but also by the response we saw in our cities. How you saw a protest that was fighting for change get co-opted, get hijacked, get taken over by arsonists, by vandals, by saboteurs who brought the greatest destruction to downtown Grand Rapids that we've seen since the 1960s. You know, I sat down with a group of African American community leaders afterwards because I think it's critical that we rebuild the social fabric that's been fraying. It's critical that we have a trust that's built between our police officers and the community that they are entrusted with protecting. I mean, this is something that is not a political issue. You have folks on the left who are trying to drag it, trying to make it partisan, but to me, it's about how can we heal our communities, how can we make sure that prosperity, that opportunity, that the American dream is accessible to all, and that none of our neighbors feel unsafe in their skin.
Mr. Norton.
Black lives matter because all lives matter. At the end of the day, it's not about the color of our skin, but the content of our character. Our nation has moved away from this idea. Out of all the candidates standing here, I'm the only one that actually held a unity rally with the police department in Grand Rapids to make sure that our police officers were funded. None of the other candidates showed up. Johnny Brand showed up, the police chief of Grand Rapids showed up, and it was a very diverse event with diverse speakers. In order to address what is going on in this nation, we need to quit pointing out the differences and understand that it is us that makes the decision on where we go in life. We cannot allow this nation to be torn down. We cannot allow our society to be torn down by what's going on. We need to make sure that we have leaders that stand up and fight for the United States of America every day of the week. Because if we don't do that, we surely will go into the darkness.
Of course, that was followed by many more questions, but now we are going to fast forward to the very end of the debate. These are the closing statements by each of the candidates.
When it comes to representation, I represent all the 3rd District. When it comes to LGBTQ community, I support you. In regards to these other candidates, they may view that you should be denied marital rights. You should be denied spousal benefits. I disagree with that. I disagree with much of which these other candidates represent. And the reason that is because I'm a social moderate. I'm a fiscal conservative, but when it comes to what people do in their homes, when it comes to what people do in their bedrooms, it's their business, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. I'm not seeking to put regulations on everybody, but at the same time, I think that we do have an issue with government. I think that we have an issue with, well, like I said, Citizens United, where it's legalized corruption, and all of them are guilty of it. And if that's what you want, vote for these conservatives, because I will not be.
Representative Afanoulis.
Thank you. I'm a mom. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I am the grandchild of legal immigrants who came to this country seeking the American dream. They built their churches and their businesses and worked so hard, and they sent their sons to war, and they loved this country, and they loved being Americans. And I want to give my children the same America that my grandparents came here for. And that's what I'll be doing when I go into Washington. I'll be fighting for the very fabric of this nation, because it is a beautiful nation, and it's the greatest nation in the world. And I want to go there for a couple of terms. I believe in term limits. I don't need a career. I've had a good long career. I want to take what I learned in the career and the skills that I've gotten, and I want to put them to work for the people of the 3rd Congressional District for a couple of terms, and then let somebody come in behind me after that. And I would be honored to earn your vote.
Mr. Meyer.
I hope to earn your vote, not based on anything but the fact that I am here to offer solutions to some of the most pressing problems that we're facing. I'm a conservative because limited government, economic freedom, individual liberty, these principles are what has made our country a superpower. It's what we can do to make sure that from now on, it's not democratic solutions that are on the table, because those are only going to cause more problems at the federal level. We need to be ensuring that we are addressing the underlying challenges. I've fought for our veterans. I've campaigned for veteran education so that they have a degree of upward social mobility that our post-World War II generation had as well. I want to go to Washington to fight for West Michigan so we have strong, stable, and effective representation. And that is why I want to earn your vote tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Norton.
My name's Tom Norton. I filed for Congress because Justin Amash would tell our veterans, "You're not my problem, go to the VA." After he tweeted to impeach the president, everybody else up here decided that they had the courage to run against him. So you already know you're going to get screwed. I'm the only one up here that was raised on a farm. I've baled hay. I've built buildings. I've worked on cars, changed transmissions and brakes. I have struggled to pay bills, but the American dream, the ability of government being out of my way, has given me the ability to be able to run for the United States Congress. It is up to us that make sure our children have a brighter future, to make sure that our grandchildren have a brighter future. The American dream is not a house or a car. It's the fact that our families can propel themselves further. That is what has been missing from everybody running for Congress. If your vote means so little that it can be bought by a commercial, then just vote that way. And one other thing you'll notice, I'm the only candidate standing on here with an American flag lapel, and that just disgusts me.
In all, the debate was nearly an hour. There were no commercial interruptions, and you can see the entire thing right now by going to woodtv.com. And we'll be back with a final note next. To the point. With a busy political week behind us, another busy week ahead as we start to look at some of the primary contests for the state house. You'll be asked to decide those in many districts. That comes up on August 4th. So for the next couple of weeks, that's what we'll be focusing on when you join us every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for To the Point.